The true money supply is sending a signal, and it's telling us information that is different than what the money supply as measured by something like M2 is telling us. And specifically, it is the growth rate or the lack of growth rate in the true money supply compared to what it has been over the last couple of years. And so today we are going to take a look at what the true money supply growth is telling us about the state of the economy right now. Ready? Let's dive in. Take a look with me at this article from Mises.org about the true money supply and what its growth is telling us right now. In case you're interested in keeping track of this, they provide regular updates on the true money supply here and what it is telling. And right now, we are going to take a look at this chart. So on this chart, we can take a look here and we can see what the orange line is going to be M2. And so M2 is one of the most widely accepted measures of the money supply. And the black line here is what they call the true money supply. This is the Rothbard-Salerno money supply measure. And so what you'll notice is it's a little bit more volatile in certain times. So this is the growth rate. This isn't the total. This is a chart of the growth rate. And so up during 2020, 2021, we can see here that the growth rate of the total money supply was as measured a lot larger than the growth rate of M2, and then sometimes it's a lot lower than what M2 is showing. And the reason why it's going to be different is because they include and exclude different portions from their measurement of the money supply. And you can read all about how it's measured. Basically, one of the biggest differences is that they take into account money that is held at the Treasury right here. So this is the Treasury's account held at the Federal Reserve. So this is the money that the Federal Reserve, that the Treasury has not spent yet. And so in early 2020, they issued a bunch of debt and got a bunch of money in from taxes, and they took a long time for them to start spending that money, and then they started spending that down. So this money is included in the total money supply measured by the Austrians simply because it's actual money. It is money that is needing to be spent or that will be spent at some point. And so why would it not be included in the measure of money? It's going to be spent at some point, so it should be included. And so it's just like a savings account, just like your checking account. It doesn't matter if you haven't spent it yet or if it stays in there for a long time. It's money that is ready to be spent. Different than something like stocks, right? You're not including stocks in the money supply, even though you can sell them, turn them into cash, and go spend that cash. Stocks are something other than money that can be turned into money, but the total money supply or the true money supply that they're measuring here tries to stay accurate, and it excludes some things that are included in M2. Like short time deposits and retail money funds. So that is what's going on here. We're seeing here since 1998 a line of this black line is the growth rate of the true money supply. So what is that telling us? What information is this telling us that it was really high before and now it's a lot lower than M2? Well, number one, we can see a drastic decrease in the growth of the supply of money. So what is the rate? Well, from November of 2020 through November of 2021, the growth in money supply was about 7%. If we look at October 2020 through 2021, the growth rate in money supply was about 6%. Now, just in case those numbers look familiar to you, if we look at November's inflation number from November 2020 through 2021, 6.8%. October, 6.2%. And so while the true money supply, M2, is showing a growth rate of 12% in November and October, 12%. The true money supply growth, as measured by the Austrians, tends to correlate a little bit closer, 7 and 6.2, to what the inflation rate is. And as we know, inflation is a result of the expansion of the money supply. And so there tends to be a little bit more correlation between the inflation rate and the money supply as measured by the Austrians. Now, obviously, we didn't get a month of 40%, so it's not going to have a perfect correlation there, but it is notable that it is a little bit closer, at least right now. Now, what else is this growth rate in the money supply telling us? Well, it turns out that recessions tend to be preceded by periods of slowing rates of money supply growth. And so anytime you see this line falling down, that means that the rate at which the money supply is growing is declining. It still means the money supply is growing, right? But it's growing at a faster or a slower rate. It's like if you're driving a car forward, you're still moving forward. But if you're decelerating, if you're stepping on the brakes, that means your speed is getting lower and lower as time goes on. And so the rate at which the money supply is growing is declining. It is slowing down. It's still growing. It's just the rate is declining. So when this line goes down, that means that soon, normally, a recession is coming. And one other thing that tends to happen, which is very interesting, is that money supply growth tends to begin growing again before the onset of the recession. And typically, the true money supply growth rate climbs and becomes larger than the M2 growth rate. So that would suggest that if we have a recession around the corner here, measured, officially, that this black line is going to pop back up above the orange line here, and that will precede the onset of the recession. So what is going on here, and why in the world would money supply growth declining signal an incoming recession? Well, there are two things going on here, and it comes down to how that new money enters into the economy. What are the mechanisms by which that money supply grows? There's two mechanisms. One of them is the government, and the other one is the banking system. Both of them ultimately are sourced by the Fed, but those are the two sources. So we'll look at the banking system first. When you swipe your credit card, when you get an auto loan, when you get a mortgage, that's not money that is being transferred to you from Aunt Sally's savings account. That is money that is being loaned into existence. That money did not exist before you spent it. That means, conversely, when you pay off debt, that is money getting destroyed, taken out of circulation, the total money supply decreasing by the amount of the debt that you paid off, because money is loaned into existence and the debt is paid off. That takes money out of existence. And so when we see the money supply grow on the back of the banking system, that is through credit expansion. That is more loans being made than are being paid off, more credit and more spending from new money coming into existence that is being loaned into existence through the banking system, backed up ultimately by the Federal Reserve. This is the normal path of money supply creation. The problem is this method does not happen during hard economic times because people don't want to borrow money because things are risky. Banks don't want to lend money because, again, it's risky. And so lending slows down and the money supply growth doesn't really go that way very well, even though things happen to try and stimulate that. So the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates to say, hey, banks, if you want to be able to keep on making the same amount of money, you got to find a way to lend more, stimulate lending through those lower interest rates, get people to borrow more since debt is cheaper. Sometimes that works. This last time it didn't. So they have to go to the second option where they go around the banking system to grow the money supply. This is through the government. Normally, when the government spends money, they're doing it one of two ways. They're taxing or they're borrowing. If they tax, they're coming out from your paycheck, from my paycheck, right? They're taking some of our money. That's not inflationary. They're taking money from here and spending it over here. Same amount of money in existence. It's just a transfer. When they borrow, when they take out debt, that is not inflationary either because, again, they're taking money from Aunt Sally and they're spending it over here. Same amount of money in circulation. No growth of the money supply. So what happened in 2020 was they grew the money supply by borrowing from the Federal Reserve. And so it didn't go directly through. It went through the market, through primary dealers, through financial institutions. But essentially what happened was the Federal Reserve printed a bunch of money to buy a bunch of government debt so that everybody who sold that government debt to the Federal Reserve could turn around, take that new cash and loan that to the federal government. Ultimately, indirectly, the Federal Reserve was loaning to the government and the government then spent that money, not all at once, but eventually. And So those trillions of dollars entered the economy. The federal government spent those dollars into existence. This is the definition of debt monetization. That's what QE is. It is taking government debt and financing it by the money printer so that the government can spend money into existence. That expanded the money supply through government spending. Those are the two ways that the money supply expands, ultimately sourced through the Federal Reserve, but the banking system is one, and the government deficit spending is the other. Now, if we take a look at this chart, we can see this is the growth rate of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. And so you can see here, it grew very quickly and then stopped growing and has been slowly growing a little bit for the last 15 months or so. Now, during this time, obviously, during 2018, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was declining, and so that's why it is below the zero line there. But their balance sheet has not been growing by that much, and that's simply because they've been buying fewer assets. They've been buying fewer assets because they haven't needed to, because federal government has not been spending as much. And so you can see here, if we zoom all the way out, hold on, let me scroll in here. If we zoom all the way out here, you can see that their spending is right now right in line with, what it's been for decades. There were some brief moments where their spending exploded, but their spending has not been out of the ordinary over the last couple of months. And so this is why the Treasury general account here, the government's account held at the Fed, has not exploded. They haven't been spending, so they haven't been borrowing a lot to blow this account up or to start spending. There's been political gridlock there, and so that's given the Federal Reserve room to not buy a bunch of treasuries, because there haven't been new treasuries being issued onto the market, and so they don't have that pressure, at least right now, to continue to monetize that debt. So what are the results of this, and why does a decline in the growth rate of the money supply lead to recessions? Well, basically it comes to this. Zombie companies, bubble industries that rely on a constant influx of new money. When the monetary supply is expanded so rapidly, you develop a massive industry of companies, corporations, and individuals that can only exist on the backs of a continued flow of new money, because they are not profitable or sustainable projects, companies. And so the only reason that they exist is because there's a flood of new money coming into the system. And when that money growth, that flood of money is shut off, suddenly you expose the insolvency and the bankruptcy, and dominoes start to fall. Because ultimately that money supply growth in the beginning was just sending a false signal to economic actors that the savings pool was large and that people should spend, and that there were plenty of resources to potentially waste on risky projects because the savings pool was large. So go out, take risks, and this is a time for growth. But when you increase the money supply, you don't increase the purchasing power. You just send a false signal about the purchasing power. So the savings pool is actually low. That means when everybody deploys all this new money, all you're doing is wasting resources that there weren't that many of in the first place. And you get to the end or close to the end of projects, and you realize that they're going to take a lot more money, a lot more resources to finish that are not there. And so when you shut off the money supply growth, you're essentially pulling the rug out from underneath this growth, fake economic growth that's riding on this wave of credit expansion and easy money expansion. And you're basically putting in a gap, an air gap underneath that, and it's going to collapse down inside of itself. And so that is what the total money supply growth is telling us, that it's been slowing down and the rug is being pulled out from underneath this fake economy. And it's only a matter of time before that air gap catches up and things start to implode. Ultimately, we know that at that point, this will skyrocket up again, and the money supply will start to grow at a very rapid pace to compensate and try and bail out the economy one last time. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.